Hey everyone, welcome to season 2, episode 7 of the Matt Martial Arts Podcast. Joined with my co-host here, Richard Bresler,
Hello.
and Gracie's first student and author of the book Worth Defending. And we're joined today with Randy McElwee, owner operator of Gracie Jiu Jitsu Athens out in Georgia. He has an incredibly cool origin story, backstory, coming through the military, becoming a Green Beret, being exposed to Gracie Jiu Jitsu military combatives, and kind of taking it from there. I would strongly suggest anybody to go back through, listen to the episode he was on before, so you can get the really detailed intro to his backstory. But for now, I'm going to throw it over to Randy so he can take it from there and give his own intro. All right, Randy.
Yes, sir. Thanks, guys, for having me. Always excited to talk about Gracie Jiu Jitsu. Quick recap of how I got into it is I started martial arts, when I was a teenager in rural West Virginia. I only took a couple classes because at the time it was a little too hard to get to transportation wise. And frankly, my family just didn't have the money for me to go and attend. I got into I graduated high school, did a quick stint as a construction worker and figured out that did not like that kind of hard work. So I opted for a government job, decided to go into the military, and I went straight in with an opportunity to try out for Army Special Forces. Once I got back in about 5 years into the military and having completed my Special Forces selection and being assigned to a group, my schedule settled down a little bit. And then I opted to pick up the pursuit again of martial arts, starting with Shotokan karate and then transitioning into a bit more of a eclectic form that emphasized practicality for self-defense. And in that, I kind of started working with the guys at the military to develop a program that was going to be useful for us at Special Forces. And along the way, discovered that earth-shattering reality of Gracie Jiu Jitsu when Royce Gracie appeared in the UFC. And then, during that time, once we discovered it, kind of started finding a way. Originally, we had no access to it directly, so we had to start off with Japanese Jiu Jitsu, and then eventually found, that Horian had these seminars that he was doing across the country and to teach the system to other folks that had predominantly karate-based martial arts schools and kind of get it going. We found a couple that were, 6 months apart, one north of us in Lexington, Kentucky, and then one kind of south and west of us in Memphis. And we started attending those, and then from there worked to get him to come into our group and train us directly.
Nice.
What year was that?
That was I did the first one at Chad Chilcutt School in Memphis in 1997 when I actually got real Gracie Jiu Jitsu.
Okay.
No, so Randy, my assumption is the martial arts or the Gracie Jiu Jitsu that you're learning in the military for real life combat situations. My assumption is it gets distilled down to everything needs to work in a practical real life situation. Is that situation or is that assumption correct? And is there anything that you can elaborate to on that?
Well, when I first got there, it was kind of like the immigrants coming to America in the early 1900s. They had heard that the streets were paved with gold and it was just there waiting on them. And then when I showed up, I found out that first of all, there were very few streets. If there were any at all, they were actually, just basic paths through the wilderness. And if there were going to be any paved streets, that we're going to build them ourselves, and then hopefully the gold would follow. So, there was a very disjointed process for military combatives, which, is what, led us to search and find Gracie Jiu Jitsu. And so at the time, there really wasn't a program in the military that was very structured. It wasn't very established, and it really had no, it made no sense at the time, and it wasn't being provided to everybody, especially the guys that really needed it, even in Special Forces.
Interesting. And so So your approach, as you think about teaching jujitsu to a new student coming in off the street, you can meet all different types of people. The person who's really focused on practical self-defense versus the D1 wrestler athlete who sees Gordon Ryan and says, hey, I want to go win big tournaments. How do you approach those conversations with new students first coming in the door? Do you do an assessment on them, or how does that work?
Well, first, I believe that you have to remember that jujitsu is a journey. But everybody starts the journey with a destination in mind. So the first thing, and often that goal is self-defense. So the first thing that I have to do is determine what do they see as their destination? Like, why are they there? And to get them started on the journey so they can discover all the hidden magic that's really in place with jiu-jitsu itself. And so the first thing I have to do is I got to kind of talk to them and make sure that my academy and our program is what they want, or if they're not sure what they want, that it will satisfy a portion of that goal. And so I got to kind of connect with them, get to know them a little bit, and find out, what's in it for them.
So I would love to also kind of loop you in on this too, Richard, because in so many of our conversations, because Richard obviously has been teaching for a long time and is an amazing instructor. And we've talked about sort of personal connection, and you need to have that rapport. And so, Richard, do you have anything to add to that? Like, for people who are listening, who are thinking about, should I go start training? Like what would be the steps that you would go through also for bringing somebody new into the fold?
Gosh, I would approach it like you're approaching a job. In other words, that find out, like, when you go into a school, that talk to people, watch what they do, watch what they teach. And because so many people, one of my biggest concerns about what I see today is the lack of structure in a program. I have a friend of mine that I met at Costco, and gosh, I've known for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years now. We say hi in passing. He knows I do jiu-jitsu. He bought my book, and he's every time that I would go into Costco, he'd say, oh yeah, I'm going to start training. I'm like, yeah, okay. And I told him where I'm at, and he goes, oh, the hours don't work right. So he found a place locally, and I checked the guy out, at least his exposure online. And what people learn, if you don't have a beginning class or a beginning program of some kind, you're just coming in and you're learning a move. And that's what I told him. I said, so what have you learned? He goes, well, there was this really cool move. And so I would see if they have a specific program. I guess, because I don't think personally, most people, when they walk into a school, that they know what they want. I didn't know what I wanted. I just, how interesting was it that I met Horian, who was probably the instructor's instructor. They can take you from class 1 all the way forward, where now, because of the way things are taught, you get what you get. And people, and I've often said this, they don't know what they don't know, and they're just kind of taking for granted. So, and that's one of the things that's sorely missing. So approach it like an interview. Watch a couple classes. Don't be in a hurry to jump in, and see if they do have a trial that you can try it out for 2 weeks, a month.
Nice. Yeah. And so Randy, I know that through the special forces and all of your training, you've developed some really amazing soft skills for dealing with people, evaluating people, and getting people comfortable. How heavily do you rely on those for the person who's walking through the door for the first time?
Well, absolutely critical, and because we tell all of our instructors, and we actually teach this here at our own academy in our program for instructors, that the bottom line is nobody cares what you know until they know how much you care. And so they're not going to listen to you until they feel like there's a connection and that you're truly interested in their progress. And so we use a program that I've kind of put together, for our own use at our academy, that's called Rapport by Design. And I've taken a lot of the stuff that we use from the mission and special forces to go behind enemy lines, to partner with an indigenous force and create a guerrilla uprising in order to, deal with a large scale overthrow of a hostile government, or, to help reinstate their, solid government. And in order to do that, you've got to first kind of learn to trust each other. So, I look at folks as they come in, at, my students, this as if they were my SF teammates, because, my life depends on them. My life that I have now depends on them, because without them, I wouldn't have the ability to have an academy, to teach jujitsu, to share those things. And so when they come in, I've got to kind of start to establish that trust. One of the challenges for me is coming from that small town and being basically a very introverted person, and then spending 20 plus years in the military in the Green Berets as our motto was the quiet professional. So, stepping out and talking to people wasn't necessarily my strength, but I did have these methods and tools that were given to us and that we practiced in order to kind of cross-culturally bond with people that we were going to be working with in those situations. So what I did was I kind of took that program and broke it down into an actual method to help folks, whenever people come into our academy, to kind of know what to say and where to start, and give them kind of a structure and a process just to talk to people. But the key, like with any, portion of being an instructor, it can't be canned. You can start with a template in the beginning, but there's a portion there where we have to teach you to bring your own personality into the process and really be yourself. Because if it's not genuine, people will know that, they'll recognize that, and then they feel, automatic mistrust instead of that connection. And what we really want with any kind of jujitsu is we want to control the connection so we can control the confrontation and, develop the process. And that's really what we try to achieve as soon as they come in the door. And we work with all of our folks in our instructor program so that they have techniques in order to do that, so they feel comfortable. And, when people come in, we do our best to make them feel comfortable, because they're our honored guests, and we want them to realize that.
That was a really cool cross-reference back to the 32 principles and the connection principle. That was well done. But I think it's interesting, right? In developing that rapport, you're right. It has to be authentic, or it actually works against you, because you do a lot of executive defense and executive coaching, right, around self-defense and protection.
Yes, I do a lot of coaching. Primarily, I work with folks that have other martial arts academies, other programs, other businesses, and I help them apply my program that's called Going Commando, which applies military principles to the concept of business and running an academy or running any business, so that they have techniques in order to do that successfully. And they have those lessons that, I learned from my time in the military, kind of laid out for them and how they can apply them. The thing is, a lot of the actual training that I conduct is corporate personal protection, and it's not so much designed for the corporate security people, but it's designed for the individual workers that work for these corporate organizations.
Something that Richard and I have talked about multiple occasions is how jiu-jitsu really is for everybody, right? And drawing back from Richard's book, right? Jiu-jitsu and the way of life can impact and benefit you in so many different ways. I personally feel like it's a shame that I think a lot of people come in and get intimidated by jiu-jitsu. Maybe their initial experience of it was, it was too intense. It wasn't really what they were looking for. And I feel like, there's a big responsibility in making sure that people get what they need at the start and get off to a good start, and so that they stick with it through those those tougher times. Are there any things that are critical to you in building an academy culture that keeps people coming back?
Well, I think you've pretty much said it, and I thoroughly believe that as the instructor, you have to own the success or the failure of your students. There, and it's kind of mentioned very well in Richard's book, where it says, his discussion with Horny about there are no bad students. And jiu-jitsu absolutely is for everyone, but they've got to have the right instructor. And unfortunately, not every instructor is for everyone. And I may not even be the right instructor for some people, especially if they're really looking for that, entry into jiu-jitsu through competition and those kind of activities. I may not be the right guy. And part of what I want to do initially is assess and determine, am I the right person to help them? And if they're really set on more of a competitive approach to it, then I may recommend that they try another program that's going to better suit their goals. But I feel like if you're an average person, that our academy has jiu-jitsu coexisting on two levels, the same way that we were in special forces. We have the guys that are the special forces operators that have a mission and are very focused on doing that. And then we also have those indigenous personnel, which in their heart have a cause, and that cause is what we want to connect to and build on, so that they can move forward in learning the skills they need to have jiu-jitsu change their life. And we got to go into it realizing that not everybody is a professional, intense jiu-jitsu practitioner, but they want to get as good as they can be with jiu-jitsu and garnish the skills and lessons from jiu-jitsu. And we want to help them do that. And so, we don't go into it trying to make everybody a UFC fighter. In fact, we don't go into it trying to make anybody a UFC fighter. We go into it trying to develop those attributes that every person has that can help them get the most out of their life and see the lessons in jiu-jitsu, because that's really the magic. That's what we all fall in love with whenever we start to do jiu-jitsu. It's initially one thing or another that gets us going, but as we're involved in it, we start to see these hidden lessons that most of the time you can only get, and a lot of the same lessons I found through the military and through special forces. But most people aren't willing to go in and enlist and commit 23 years of their life to get those lessons, and they shouldn't have to. That's the beauty of jiu-jitsu, is we can share it with them without having to have that level of commitment, at least initially. And when you start, you start to make changes. I know Richard has a great story in his book about how when he first started out, he didn't go into it necessarily to change his life and to stop doing some of the things he was doing that were detrimental health-wise. But the longer you're involved in jiu-jitsu, and we see this with everybody, the more you start to take an interest in how you can better yourself. And that's really what we want to tap into with everybody that comes in to train.
I definitely have some things I would love to kind of come back with on that. But Richard, do you have anything to add to that? Because it's sort of in hearing that, Richard, do you have anything to add to that?
I guess the one thing that popped into my mind, and that, because I'm constantly second guessing myself, and we've had conversations of this, phone conversations, as just, Randy, do you have a specific, for the new students, is there a specific beginning program?
Absolutely. What we have initially is we have a 2-week trial that we start them off on, and that begins with a one-on-one individual lesson with the instructor. And it's to it's not so much to teach the techniques, but it's to establish some rapport, get to know them, find out a little bit about what they perceive their goals to be going into it. Because we all know that, like you said, they may not really have an idea why they're there. Maybe their friend said, hey, it was good. Maybe they listened to Jocko's podcast and heard that it was a great thing to do. And so now they're taking that leap. And the one thing we try to do more than anything is remember that it takes real courage to come into a jiu-jitsu academy and take your first class. We all sometimes overlook that because we've been involved, in jiu-jitsu for so long that we forget what it's like to be brand new. And so we try to emphasize that, you know, and recall our own understanding of what it's like to start from the beginning. And so we bring them in, we start them that way. And then we have another component that's built into our regular group class program, which we call our essentials, which is our white to blue program. And part of that is we require our upper level folks that are blue belt and above to come back to so many classes of what we refer to as beginner review classes. Because now at each level, you're looking at the same material with different eyes and a different perspective. Also with that, and this is a key part of our culture, we believe, is we encourage those folks to always partner with the brand new people so that they have somebody who's a little further along that can help guide them and share with them some of the things. Plus, now they also have to think about it as teaching a one-on-one lesson every time they're in class. So they've got to articulate the details of the techniques. They got to incorporate and encompass the principles that make those techniques work. And they have to learn to share and develop that connection with an individual who is brand new.
Good, good. You know, one of the things I'm glad that they do that, and just it's the guys that have been with me the longest, and I've always appreciated that, is that, and obviously it had to be, you know, sometimes I forget at different levels that I'm teaching, but the newer guys will come in, and the guys that have been with me the longest will naturally gravitate toward them. And I realize they're not just doing that, they've been taught to do that, but I forgot a lot of the things at different levels that I teach at, because I take it for granted. And I'm also teaching, like, and the thing that I question myself a lot about is, you know, doing seminars, and there's so many guys that are showing moves, and I've talked to Jason about this, it's just the fundamentals. It's the basic kind of stuff that I take for granted because I know it, because it's been drilled into my head on so many levels. So, you know, he tells me about certain things that he sees, and then when I went over to the school and I asked him to show me a couple moves, and then I showed him little details on the move. And my philosophy, and maybe it's not my philosophy, it's just something that I've been doing so long, is to show less moves more times. And just, and I would rather, and I'm always, you know, you go back to the one thing you've heard about Bruce Lee: learn one kick and practice 1,000 times, not 1,000 kicks and practice once. And I keep like going, gosh, what am I gonna show them new? And I don't really have to show them. I just have to take what they're doing and make it that much better, make it that much easier. Because one of the gifts that I have that I didn't think was a gift for a long time is, you know, I'm like soaking wet 140 pounds and in my 70s. So when I see guys that are, you know, that I call younger guys, which are older because they're in their 50s, and I tell them, I say, guys, look, and a couple of guys I have, you know, they're big, strong guys. I said, you can use the power that you have. It's yours. I can't. I said, so I have to focus, you know, because most of the guys that I trained with were bigger than me. I had to develop that. And I tell them, I said, no matter, even if you're bigger than the guys, you still want to develop, because eventually, if you stay in this thing that we all love long enough, you're going to lose your power. You're going to lose your speed. You better have something to fall back on. You're going to lose your timing. But the little technical details that you have become so important the longer you're around. And it's just something that, you know, I go back to that, and it's you know, and Jason, I mean, I've talked to him many times about it's like, oh gosh, like, what am I going to add? And I forget what I have for so long. Like I put in the book, people have contacted me, if you and I talk, Randy, we would just talk about jujitsu, about the stuff we normally would, but and I would tell you what happened, tell you my stories, but putting it out for the world to see, you get to realize, because when I've told a story one-on-one, no one says to me, wow, Richard, you're really vulnerable to say that. But putting it out in a book, they put that out there because I basically, what you see is what you get. I think we need to share ourselves, our vulnerabilities, our insecurities, because we're all wanting to be able to deal with the unexpected. And we all have those little things. And this is something to build each other up. And it's something that I'm sorry, I went into my personal struggle. This is about you.
I really enjoy your story. In fact, I've gone through the book a couple of times, and I don't do that with very many books, but I really have enjoyed it. And one of the things I think you said that kind of rings true with me all the time, and I try to keep at the forefront of what I'm doing is, the lesson I learned in Special Forces is you got to be brilliant at the basics. And, a lot of times now, like you were saying, a lot of guys are trying to show these fancy moves, and I run into it with my own students. They'll come in and they've just seen the latest, coolest thing on YouTube, and they'll ask me about it. And what I usually try to do is say, well, that's very impressive, but why wouldn't you just do this? And I try to give them the short, simple, basic answer that I know will work in every situation. And a lot of times the magic for them isn't that I teach them anything complex or anything new. It's that I show them, and I'm not doing it. It's something that I've stolen from all the great instructors that I've had and people that I've known in jiu-jitsu. But I show them that simple little magic that is so inherently brilliant that you never even thought of it. But it's so simple. The first thing you say to yourself is, man, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I realize that? And I think that's really the critical part of getting them to realize that there's always another layer to each technique and little details that will make it work. And if it's not working, or you're not impressed with it, it's because you don't know all the intricacies of that technique. And I went to a seminar with Horian, I guess it's been 10 years ago now. And one of the things he taught was just the basic cross-collar choke. But as you well know, learning the basic cross-collar choke from Horian Gracie is really learning the cross-collar choke and all the little things that you never knew even existed as part of that technique. And we see that with so many great instructors, and that's the real magic that they have, is they know the things so well that they can show you these refined pieces that make it magical.
Interesting that you say that, because I have a couple of guys that I teach. They're both in their 50s, and I taught them yesterday, and one's a 4-stripe blue and the other one is a 2-stripe white. And when we have our class, I basically say, okay, look, we're just going to go over the basics. And one of the things that we always do in the class is, okay, let's go. Let's cross-collar choke. And the thing that gets me is that, because I've had guys that have come to take a private with me, and I'll black belts, different levels, and I'll have them do the choke the way that Horian did. And I'll go like, yeah. And, and I'm sure you've heard this before. When they do it, you'll say, and I'll just say almost perfect. And, and then I'll take a little gesture. I'll choke them once and they'll go like, whoa, or I'll see, because the thing, having a private class or many private classes with Horian, as you're choking somebody, when you grab, he would always hold my arms and just say, relax, relax, relax. Where when they're doing with each other, they don't even know they're not relaxed. And that's why I come in, and now I can see, I don't have to feel, although I'll come in and I'll let them choke me once or twice, and I'll just say, guys, you need to relax. So it's learning the technique, getting to calm down, looking for the adjustment and the details that so many people, they don't know because they've never been taught. And I mean, and you have gosh, one of the best instructors out there. Pedro Sauer, man, that guy, I love Pedro Sauer. I mean, I've known him for a long time, and I see the little things that he does, and it's just, the guy, he's amazing.
Absolutely.
So,
and he definitely shares that brilliance you're talking about. And every time I think of Horian, I still hear his voice in my head, just like you said, with the accent and everything, saying, "Oh, Randy, relax and do your move." Because that's the first thing that always comes to mind, because he said it so many times. And we always thought we were relaxed. I know when he first saw what we were doing with jiu-jitsu, because initially we learned the Japanese jiu-jitsu, and then we started getting the videos that he had put out, and began to learn from there. But until we got to see him in person, we were training ourselves, and we were recording our training, so that we had feedback on what we were doing, and then we would, try to progress from there and develop it. And when we showed him the videos of our training, I know he was horrified at just what we were doing with his jiu-jitsu. And he was like, I still remember what he says, like, "Oh, Randy, my God, you're going to kill yourself before you ever find the enemy." And it's because we were so rough, we were so refined with our technique. And then once we started to train with him and with the other instructors that knew authentic Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, we started to see just how much we were missing with those details in that little piece of every technique. And my gift isn't my jiu-jitsu. I'm not that impressive at it. I'm not that great at it. But one of the things that I've managed to do and to build on over the years is my talent lies in developing programs and putting them together in packaged curriculums and a process to where everybody can get as close to my level as possible in the most efficient and effective manner. And that's really what I got from the military that I try to share with each and everybody that we train. And that's really my love, is I love to take programs, package them, make them more effective, and have an actual learning progression laid out for people so they can see their path and they can follow the steps and improve, but all the while learning that magic and getting brilliant at the basics.
So Randy, Richard, I have a question primarily for you, Randy, because I think I know the answer pretty well from Richard, because we've talked about this before. What is it about Gracie Jiu Jitsu and this culture of giving and really being humble and seeing a big goal and developing other people? What is it that makes the culture so unique that really instills that in so many of its really good, solid practitioners?
Well, for me, I think it's the example, because that's the example that I got from the very first time that I had a Gracie Jiu Jitsu seminar with Hoist. And it's always been kind of, for me, taught on many levels from many different instructors from all martial arts, that as an instructor, that's your role. Your role is service to the student, especially once you hit black belt. Black belt isn't about you anymore. It's about what you give back and what you share of the art back to other people, because you look at it and you realize how it's positively impacted your life. And then, I feel like if you're looking at it and it's been presented to you with the right process and principle, you feel that obligation to give back because it's given so much to you. It's made such changes in your life that you really feel that responsibility to make sure that that's shared with other people.
No, that's a great answer. And it's funny because it jumps out at me how, in hearing both of you talk about the techniques and this obsession to stay really true to the details so that we don't essentially water down our lineage over time, right? It'd be great if everybody looked at it in the same way, but it's really cool in hearing you both being so obsessed on the details and the basics to make sure that everybody is getting the instruction as close to the original source as possible. I think that's a really cool thing. It wasn't really even a question, but I think it was just more of a comment, because it's something that Richard and I have talked about like obsessively. And the other one too is the obligation that instructors have to really be making sure that there's that their students are also staying safe from a practical sense. And I know that we touched on it before. We didn't, I don't feel like we went into a whole lot of detail, but when I think about sort of the evolution of jiu-jitsu, right? And so much focus right now being on competition, where do you think all of this is going? Like, and I know that, where do you think all of this is going with the impact of competition? Do you think that we're ever going to get back to a thing where it's primarily self-defense, or, yeah?
I think that, it's like anything else. You simply have to look at history. The same thing happened with karate. Karate started out, it came to America, and it was very self-defense focused. But one of the challenges of being human beings is we're always attracted to entertainment and to games. So we will always choose this entertainment and this escape through entertainment before we choose, reality and practicality, especially if it puts us in peril. And we've learned this lesson a few times while I was in the military. When there was no conflict, like the times leading up to 9/11, a lot of things were more theory than application. But once reality sets in and you have to face that, and you're continually presented with the facts that what you thought was good, what you thought was effective doesn't work in these situations, then you're sent back to find the right answer. And you keep asking yourself, well, what's missing? And a lot of times you circle back to what you can find as historically effective. And that tends to be, in my opinion, what's happening right now with jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is immensely entertaining. And, in competition, you got to remember you're taking the lack of parameters and you're fencing it in, so that there are weight classes, there are set things that make it more entertaining. And that's really what the UFC proved years ago, and proved especially to karate practitioners, which I was one of at the time, that what you thought was effective and what you thought was going to happen didn't, unfold the way you thought it would. And then you were forced to look at other options. And I think that's, kind of the key. So, one of the things I try to emphasize to my students is there's a major difference between the practicality of self-defense and the application for sport. And no matter how violent or brutal the competition gets, even in MMA, it's still a game. Nobody's actually trying to kill you. Now, they're trying to hurt you, they're trying to win, but you're not fighting for your life, you're fighting for your ego. Like it or not, it boils down to that. And I have a lot of discussions with a lot of my friends that are very, sport oriented and love the sport. And I love it too. It's done amazing things for jiu-jitsu. But once we lose the perspective of there's a difference in what happens out on the street and what happens in a controlled environment, then we get ourselves into trouble. Because I can lose a tournament on points and I'm okay. I can't lose a street fight because I tried a move that was only going to be effective because of rules that are implemented. I can't make that mistake out on the street. I only have one chance.
Yeah, and there's no referee. I think that's critical. And it was something that Richard and I were talking about actually just yesterday. There's a lot of content that gets put out, and people could be completely well-intentioned. They could put content out, but they'll show a technique where they're also essentially potentially putting somebody in harm's way due to a false sense of security. And I don't know, Richard, did you want to talk at all about that, kind of some of the content
Yes.
you're seeing out there?
I'm screaming on the inside listening to it,
Well, the floor is yours, Senator.
Okay, well, how many, do I have 2 minutes or what?
I'm not going to filibuster you, don't worry.
The one of the things that's really important is that, and I'm sure both of you guys are aware of this, is that jiu-jitsu is self-defense. And so many, and teaching it competition based or even MMA based is offense. And when you're offensive, especially if it's one thing if you're skilled, but I saw a fight last night. I was watching the UFC, which I usually, when I watch them, I fast forward because I hate to just see them punch each other. And there were actually two females, both from Brazil. And the one beat the other one in an arm triangle. And when she was caught in the arm triangle, she just kind of stayed there. She didn't do anything to defend herself. It was just like, oh crap, I'm caught. And I'm screaming, going, turn away from it. Like, grab your leg. And I'm like, going, it reminded me of the first UFCs when people kept getting caught in a guillotine. And they would just flail like this. They wouldn't even grab the wrist. And I go, isn't this common sense? Or maybe I've been doing it so long that it become common sense. When they grab, I grab, and and relieve the pressure. But the thing, my point is, it's when, especially if you're on your back, someone's in your guard and they're throwing punches. I've seen people try to show a technique where they catch the arm and get them in an arm lock. And I'm like, and I'll even tell students, I said, look, you have somebody on top of you raining punches down. If you can't get an up kick, but if they're that close, you can't. You have to defend the punches. You have to make sure, and one of the things that I like is what Henner and Hiran say. And I don't know if it's law enforcement or probably not. I don't think it's just law enforcement. I think it's anybody. It's basically the 100-second rule. And if you get in a confrontation, you have basically a minute and a half, give or take, of just protecting yourself. And most people want to, you stand up and you just think, well, they punch, you punch. And I'm just saying, you know what? I don't want to trade with anybody, ground or not. I want to defend myself first. And that's how usually when I used to teach, have the competition based stuff, I'd always say, okay, look, for the first 2 to 3 minutes, let them attack and you just defend. Let them tire themselves out, and then I'll give you the high sign and you can attack. And that I was pretty successful with that approach, but I'd always see the guys looking over at me going like, oh man, Richard, are you sure you know what you're talking about? Because they'd be like, oh crap, and I'm just gonna I saw Horian just calm, just stay calm. But it's the same thing when you are in a fight with anybody, you have to defend first. And that's the thing with so many other arts, is just that they think, okay, got to get away, punch, 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 kick, whatever, and then run. But if you don't finish it the way a lot of them, and I worked for an organization like that for a long time, and I just say, look, if you don't get it done in the first 10, 20 seconds, and they throw you down on the ground, you better have a backup plan. Otherwise, you've exhausted yourself and you have no technique. So it's defend first. Remember, it's a self-defense. It's not self-offense. It's learn how to defend yourself. And I'll tell people too, I'll say, look, I hear people saying, oh, you defend and then you wait for the time and then you finish them. I'm not even thinking that far ahead. I just want to make sure that I can defend myself for the onslaught and be able to walk away. I'm not thinking, okay, maybe, I'll catch them in an arm lock. If possibility, I'll show something. But when it comes to reality based, I always remember going, Horian hearing, don't underestimate anybody. And a fight is, you can plan for it, but it is what it is. And you have to be ready for it. So defend first. And that's not being taught. Those principles are not being taught. Is my 2 minutes up?
Yeah, but that was solid. No, that was solid gold. And I think that it really is the underpinning of the thing that the three of us have already talked about so much. And that is the need for responsibility, the responsibility that instructors have on, hey, listen, here are the danger spots. If you want to be flashy, that's fantastic. But you also have to have practical self-defense in case you need it, right? Because flash is fun, flash is great, but without the foundation, it's dangerous. So now that was a great 2 minutes. And so kind of just coming down the backstretch on this one and getting ready to like wrap it up, is Randy, obviously you're up to some really cool things we were talking about. Do you want to tell us about some of the recent events in your life? I mean, your son getting promoted to black belt is huge, and travel plans. You want to talk about that?
Sure. I know that that's a big moment for me personally, because the whole reason I started the academy when I retired from the military back in 2005 was because of the way things kind of, progressed and unfolded. I wanted to be home with my son, who was very young at the time, and be able to spend that time with him as he grew up. And that's the whole reason I opened the academy, started it, so I could have him here with me every day. And, we could work together. We've been able to do that. And now he works with me at the academy. In fact, he primarily runs the academy. And, that culmination happened at the beginning of June, whenever he tested and got his black belt. And it's been a very long process. He started at age 4, and we've been working through that. And part of that process is making sure I instill in him the requirement for that purity of Gracie Jiu Jitsu and why that's important. And, a key principle of that we share with our students, just like Richard was talking about, is for us, Gracie Jiu Jitsu is an ambush art. I'm never going to go and attack somebody. If I'm attacking, then something's very wrong with my whole process. And I bring that from Special Forces, because working in small 12-man teams, you can't go out and start a fight with a battalion-sized enemy element. You got to, make sure that you stay undetected as much as possible, and that all of your attacks are really an ambush waiting to happen. And so you're not going to go after the person. And I see it all the time with people whenever they start to roll sometimes, especially if they come from other programs or they're here visiting, they'll actually sit back on their butt and, try to pull the person into their guard. And it hurts my soul every time I see it. And we emphasize to our folks, we know why they're doing it. They want to get to the portion of training to where they can work on their guard and other techniques. But we emphasize to our students, never, ever, ever pull guard, because you would not do that in a street fight. You would not pull any person on top of you just to see how good your guard is. So don't let that become your default in training. We want to program the training so that you automatically do what you've always done, and it's an effective answer. And that's kind of why we focus on that. So having him get his black belt is a very big moment for us. And over the last, year, for many years now, I've been working with another one of my Special Forces friends, and he brings us in to do the self-defense portion of different leadership programs that he's doing. And, through that, we've worked a lot with women's self-defense. We have a women's self-defense program, our SAFE program. And, we've done it for a number of years, training over 5,000 women in our seminars. And we do big groups here at the University of Georgia with, over 150 girls out on the lawn of their sorority house. And, it's very empowering to get to do that. And as part of that, over the past year, I've been doing these corporate personal protection seminars. A lot of it's built around, active shooter scenarios and helping folks with, worst case scenario self-defense for that. And so now we're going to be going to London at the beginning of next month in order to do something similar for one of the corporations over there. And then while I'm there, I'm going to be teaching an instructor certification course, going to be doing a seminar for some of the Pedro Sauer affiliates in the UK, and visiting some other academies there. And we're really excited about it because it's kind of a big trip for us. My son and I haven't done an overseas trip together, and it's kind of reminiscent of my time back in the military. And I haven't been there in over 20 years. So, it's very nostalgic and in a great way.
How old is your son?
He's 23. Actually, he's not yet 23. He'll be 23 in just a little over a month.
Is he on social media also?
He is. He's not like majorly active, but yes, he's on social media. He's a little bit like me. He's kind of an introvert. We're still suffering from that quiet professional, personality. And we're working on that, trying to be more out there. And I think one of the challenges for all of us sometimes is, and I saw or heard a great reflection of this in your book when you're talking about how you were in one circle, that before you had moved in with Horian, and then you moved in and changed your circle, and how that had a great impact on you. Well, you know, having that circle for me of the introverted, quiet professional for 23 years makes it a little hard sometimes for me to actually put myself out there and connect with people. So I'm always working on that.
I'm an introvert, you know, in spite of what people may have seen, but like I'm very much, you know, jiu-jitsu's kind of helped to bring me out, and
Absolutely.
because it's kind of hard to be introverted, especially because of all the attention that this book has gotten me. I never realized that how much that people would be drawn to, and the messages that I've received from people. It's been amazing. So I kind of have to be a little more, I guess, outgoing, for lack of a better term.
Well, it's a very inspiring story. I know I really enjoyed it, and you know, I think it connects with a lot of people because you were willing to share, you know, your imperfections, and I think we all run into that. I know a lot of times when I'm trying to work with people, they expect a lot because of my background in special forces, and they think that, you know, I don't have any fear. I'm amazing at jiu-jitsu. I'm a great shot. I can do all these things, and I have some of those skills, but I'm as human as anybody else. You know, I still have fears and doubts and those kind of things that we all have to deal with. It's just, I was lucky enough to be in that circle for a while and learn a lot of times just by, you know, proximity from guys that had solutions to those problems. And that really has a lot to do with it. And I think that's also why so many people are so excited and connected when they find jiu-jitsu, because they find all these different people in that environment, and it really does echo a lot of positivity that they may not have in their own lives. And you know, I that's the biggest thing I've gotten from it, primarily, and I owe a lot of that to Horian, is that connection of being a very positive and pleasant person. Because, you know, with the former career in special forces, there was some pressure to be a very aggressive person, and truthfully, that's just not my nature. My mother didn't raise me that way. And, you know, she was always that influence in my life about being a nice person. And so that's who I am at my heart and soul. And I needed ways to kind of bring both of those personalities together. And it's a lot easier to be a nice guy when you know that nobody can beat you up. And I think that's a great lesson I got from Horian, and that he got from his father. And so it's amazing. I always, you know, look back and I'm like you. I have to admit that in a way I was an addict. And you know, I tell everybody that you know, my addiction was special forces, and I'm a recovering Green Beret. And people don't always understand that, because once you've been a part of those kind of things, it's really hard to move on. And there's a very famous in our community kind of poem from a guy named James Ward that worked for the OSS, which was the predecessor to Special Forces and the CIA. And it goes like this: is, you know, men, Special Forces is a mistress. Your wives will envy her because she will have your heart. Your wives will be jealous of her power to pull you away. This mistress will show you things you've never seen before. You'll experience things that you have never felt before. And she'll love you, but just a little, to get you to give more for her and to die for her. She'll take away from the loved ones that you love, and you'll hate her for it, but you'll never leave her. And if you must, for she has a part of you that will never be returned intact. And in the end, she'll leave you for a younger man. And so, you know, that's kind of the story of that lifestyle, but we all kind of wind up with a little bit of addiction to it. And I wouldn't have been able to move on from it without jiu-jitsu, just like you. And that's kind of what made it all work for me, is I was able to leave that lifestyle, have that time with my son, because of the benefits of jiu-jitsu.
That was super cool.
Yeah, well said. And you know, it's interesting because you bring up that one thing, and that's one of the things that was the hardest thing for me to understand, is the notion of fear. Because being around them and seeing how, like, they would especially do the challenges. I went like, wow, man, they're just going for it. They're not afraid. And I remember when I went to Brazil and I walked around the streets of Rio with Hicks and Gracie when he was 19 years old. And I just felt like, me walking down the street alone in Rio in the evening, I would have been scared. But walking with Hickson, I felt so secure. And I went, oh, wow, this guy has no fear. And that was how I thought about fear. And that's when I approached Horian. And I think this is such a message for everybody, because when we're afraid, it's kind of like we think it's like it's such a negative thing. And, I'm afraid I have this. And it took me a while to figure out that we all have fears. And I remember when Horian said it, it's just that you're either paralyzed from it or you recognize your fear and you move through it. And that's probably the biggest thing, is that fear it's a natural part of life, period. And it's just how you can learn to deal with it. And that's probably one of the biggest things in jiu-jitsu, is that, because of being bullied when I was a kid. And I just thought, well, God, I kind of timid and always, and I realized that it's like, okay, you're always going to have it, but how you deal with it. And that's, I think, a message for so many people out there that may have that, even fear of walking into the school. Like you said, it's courageous to walk into that. I guess I never realized how courageous I was to go in for my first class 44 years ago.
Yeah, because there was a lot less known about it then, and especially like you said in the book, when you first walked in and saw the weapons in the corner and you wasn't sure if he was going to murder you. So definitely overcoming a lot of fear. And kudos to you for sharing your story with all that, that personal information, putting yourself out there about your life, and overcoming the fear of embarrassment or whatever. That takes a lot of courage, and I'm really impressed. I love the story.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on and sharing yourself with us today.
It's my pleasure. It was an honor to be here. Always love to talk jiu-jitsu, especially with guys that are at the root of it, that are embracing that authentic Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and have that connection. I love the stories behind Jiu-Jitsu. That's my favorite part of, when I get to hang out with Professor Sauer, is listening to all the things that happened in the progression and remembering when I first met and got to really spend some time with Horian. And it's amazing because he laid out this whole vision for what Jiu-Jitsu would become back in 1990s, late 90s, of how it would evolve, because he had it planned out all then and he saw it, and it was incredible.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, and I know we got to wrap it up, but the last thing is that when I went into a school up in Northern California and introduced myself to them, and it seems like nobody really even cared. It's like there's a small, and when I say small group, relatively small, because even though Pedro Sauer has a big group, and the boys have a big group of people, but I feel like we're also in kind of a little bubble, because there's so much out there in jiu-jitsu that people don't know the stories. They don't even know how this thing started. And it was 44 years ago. It was not that long ago. And they don't care. It's just like, oh yeah, well, let's just go to train.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Well, that's really a big focus of the podcast, is like bringing stories like this out, so people can hear about the lineage and people can hear about, sort of like to your earlier analogy, there were no roads. Let's forge a path. Let's pave it. paving those roads is what makes it possible for these people to do that. So hopefully through more of the stories being told brings back a newfound respect and also curiosity about the lineage, right? And Randy, I'm grateful for your generosity, your time, just how open you are. I mean, I sent you a text yesterday. We started talking again. It is always great talking with you, and thank you so much for making the time to do this.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Richard, anything else?
Nothing that I can think of. Is well, my 2 minutes was up, right? So I can't talk anymore, right?
I think you're approved.
No, I'm good. I'm good. That was. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us, and good luck when you go to London.
Thank you.
Great, Randy. Thanks a million. Thanks, Richard. See you soon. Hope everybody enjoys the episode.